Hello and welcome to episode 109 of the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. My name is Suzie. I'm your host and I'm an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. Before I get into today's episode, I want to just give a quick thank you to everybody who listens to the podcast, who rates the podcast, comments on the podcasts and shares it with their friends. It really helps me to get this podcast to people who need it, to help people on their spiritual journey, to navigate what's happening and to hopefully give them some guidance and some tips and practices that they can use on their spiritual journey. If you haven't yet left a review or rated the podcast, I really would appreciate if you just take a minute to do that. It's the only way that really tells wherever you listen to your podcast that this is a podcast for other people as well. Today, I'm going to talk about whether or not I believe that systems such as human design, G keys, personality tests, all of this, whether they're helpful on the spiritual path. I'm covering this because this is a question I get asked a lot when I'm on Instagram Live, when I do my free workshops, and I'm going to share my opinion on this. This is all it is, so take it or leave it. And I'm sure you probably know by now that this isn't going to be a straightforward answer. So I want to share my thoughts on this topic and give you something to reflect upon. First of all, let's take a look at why these different systems exist in the first place. So they're all ways of understanding ourselves. Okay, that's what they are all for. And understanding ourselves from a different perspective. So for example, understanding your astrology can be helpful in understanding why you have certain traits, why you behave in a certain way, why you may have difficulties with other people who are of different signs, etc. They can be really useful in ways of understanding ourselves. However, they're to understand ourselves from the little s self perspective. Okay, they're not to understand ourselves from the soul level perspective. And the spiritual journey, of course, is when you stop thinking of yourself or you stop considering yourself in an entirely materialistic way. So I'm just a body, I'm just my thoughts, I'm just my emotions, I'm just chemical processes. And you start to see yourself from that higher, more spiritual perspective. Now, I have to give a little side note here to astrology, because astrology is a whole fabulous science within itself. And it's much more than just understanding yourself, little s self. It can be really, really helpful in understanding yourself in respect of what's going on from a cosmological perspective. Because when you look at astrology, you're looking at you and also the cosmic forces that are at play. So astrology is not something I've studied. It's something that I believe you have to dedicate a lifetime to studying because it's fabulously complex and interesting. But that is very helpful from a more objective, bigger picture perspective. The other systems can be absolutely very helpful, but we have to understand the limitations as well. Humans wanting to understand themselves is nothing new. Something that has been studied for thousands of years throughout esoteric and spiritual traditions is the study of the self, the study of the human body, the study of how we interact with those bigger cosmic forces. And you will see in esoteric teachings the understanding that self-exploration and self-realization leads to God realization. Where we have to be very mindful is, are we looking to understand little s self or big S self? Because they are different. Now, in modern day terminology and modern day systems, we tend to have systems that will look at only one aspect of the self. So, for example, psychology. Understanding yourself from a psychological archetypal perspective can be very, very helpful. But psychology is just studying the mind. It's not studying the whole picture. Other practices are going to take a more holistic view, and that's great too. There is nothing wrong with any of this, and as always, you're going to be drawn to work with and understand different systems and different practices and different perspectives along your spiritual journey as you evolve and expand, and depending upon what your magnetic center is drawn to. All of these systems can be very, very helpful in your journey to understand yourself. However, all of these systems can also be egoic distractions, okay? So what can happen is we can get attached to these definitions of our little s self. We can use them to keep us stuck with this idea of our limited sense of self. So, for example, as you all know, I'm a projector. And there are aspects of understanding my projectorness, if you will, that's been really, really helpful in my life, especially when it comes to running a business, understanding my energy, understanding why I burn out so much. But I make great effort not to become defined or attached to it. I, for example, may receive an intuitive hit about something that I'm going to do. And if I looked at it from the perspective of my human design chart, it might not coincide with my projectorness, but I'm going to always allow my internal technology, my intuition, my soul to speak to me, and I'm going to take actions based on that. I'm not going to say, well, this is what this system says, and therefore I have to only go with what that system says. So it's about not being defined to it and not being attached to it. Think of them as different lenses and different ways to understand yourself. But you are understanding little s self, you're not understanding big S self. And the spiritual journey is all about understanding big S self. You can end up spending hours, days, weeks of your life investigating and understanding these systems. And for you, that might be part of your spiritual journey. And there is nothing wrong with that, okay? But just have in the back of your mind, am I allowing this to become a distraction? Am I allowing my ego to get attached to this? Am I using this to define myself? Or am I also using this just as a lens to understand how I'm functioning and operating in this physical reality? And I'm actually focusing on understanding myself, having that self-realization that leads to the God realization. A really good sign that your connection to your understanding of this system is becoming a hindrance rather than a help is if you're spending more time kind of analyzing and overthinking a system and learning about a system than your spiritual practice. As I said, they can be great, they can be helpful, but if you're not doing the practice, whatever your spiritual practice is right now, because you're going down these rabbit holes, then good time to maybe step out for a bit and just to focus on the spiritual practice. There is always a time and a place for understanding yourself through your spiritual journey and through your spiritual evolution. And there is also a time and place where these systems are no longer going to become relevant for you and no longer have any interest for you. And both of those things are okay. Just as there is a time for healing and purification on the spiritual journey, there's also going to be a time to just focus on that abiding in the absolute bliss and the awe of your own existence. The purpose of the spiritual journey is to really connect to that divinity within, to connect to the you that is the individualized fractal of source consciousness, that is unlimited, unconditionally loving and expansive, that has chosen to come here and have a limited experience. This is what the purpose of the spiritual journey is. Are these systems helpful? They can be. They can be depending upon where you're at, depending on what it is that you're understanding about yourself, what you're learning about yourself. But as always, watch out for spiritual ego. Watch out when we're becoming attached or defined or limiting ourselves because of the system that we have attached ourselves to. So I hope this has just given you some food for thought. As I said at the start, this is just my opinion and my perspective, so take it as you will, but I do hope it's just given you a couple of things to consider, and I will of course see you next week for the next episode.